Before we begin, we're going to take a few moments to introduce ourselves. I am Nina ROKET. I'm a partner at Olshan from Wolosky. I'm a partner in the real estate group, and I chair the commercial leasing practice of the firm. I'm also one of the managing partners of the firm, and we are a full-service firm based here in New York City. I'm expecting to have a lively, free-flowing conversation. And before we begin, I'll allow each of the ladies here to introduce themselves, and then we will hit the ground running. So RAMNEEK, why don't you start us off?
Sure. I'm Romney Rickey. I'm a senior vice president at CBRE, where I've been for over 17 years. I'm also an NYU alum. I graduated from Stern many, many years ago, undergrad. And at CBRE, I focus on tenant rep leasing for the most part, largely larger, more complex transactions. I'm in the consulting group, and that's our specialty, taking a more holistic strategic approach to tenants' occupancy needs.
Great, thanks. I'm Megan Sheehan. I'm a managing director at Tishman Speyer. I've been at Tishman Speyer for about 15 years, which is unbelievable. Before that, I actually worked with RAMNEEK at CBRE. And so I started also on the tenant side, but now work on the landlord side in leasing. And within Tishman Speyer, I focus on a subset of buildings, mostly phenomenal trophy assets in Midtown. So it's great to be here.
I'm Kathy Chase, and I'm a partner and director of leasing at Industry City, which I hope everyone knows. It's a 6 million square foot adaptive reuse project in Brooklyn on 35 acres. We've been working on the project for about 7 years, and we work on the development, the redevelopment, the leasing, the programming, the operations. We do everything in-house.
Great, thank you. So here we are. We have all had to pivot, and we've all had to change our lives, change the way we manage and run our businesses, and real estate has really been no exception. The leasing market in particular has gone from a robust talent and amenity-driven practice where the tenant experience and building a community was and were a primary focus for both landlords and tenants, to where we are today. So RAMNEEK, where are we today?
In a much better spot than we were 18 months ago.
Amazing.
When I wanted to, it was bad. I agree with all the sentiments said earlier. Being on Zoom in your house feels extremely lonely. Even if you have your dog and husband and kids there. I don't have a dog, by the way. But no,
we need to work on that. But
no, I mean, listen, we're obviously still at a place where leasing velocity is extremely low, where we're still about half at the velocity we were back in 2018. We have historical availability in the market at like 18.7, which I think is the highest since 1992. Having said that, I'm actually working on deals. And if you look at where, tenants in the market, we always track that, what's going on. And we're back up to 66% of pre-pandemic levels. And it was actually even higher. We had reached, I want to say almost 80 in July. And then, Delta and August in general put a dent in that and slowed that down a little. But there is activity out there. Last year, I was reading lease clauses, force majeure, working with tenants on figuring out rent deferrals, 1-year extensions if they really needed to do something, just like kicking the can down the road. And now I'm engaged. Something happened in January. You had the more opportunistic tenants realize, okay, there is a light at the end of this tunnel. We don't know where it is or the length of it, but it's there. And we've been working on long-term requirements. I've been working on expansion. So oddly enough, even though we're only at around a little under 20% of office occupancy right now, office tenants were extremely successful over the past 18 months. So if you see, like who's in the market right now, tech has always been in the market over the past 5 years. They've been a big portion of leasing activity. They haven't slowed down over the last 18 months. Financial firms actually have increased. So there has been an increase in how many financial firms are in the market compared to pre-pandemic. And also professional services and law firms, right? So I think it's kind of amazing to be here now. I would not have been able to project the timeline of that versus where we were 18 months ago. I mean, it's interesting, like now you're also even seeing these weird bidding wars for certain asset classes. So again, the overall activity, we still have a ways to go, but there is a lot of hope and these pockets of superior activity in other places.
So activity is certainly on the rise.
Definitely.
KATHE, what is leasing activity looking like in your portfolio?
For us, it's robust. I would say since the pandemic, since March of 2020, we've leased about 750,000 square feet. That said, I think that we have adapted in ways that a lot of owners can't. We're on a campus with lots of outdoor space. We have a lot of flexible space. So although I agree across the board, I think everybody's talking about getting back to work. It's a matter of what that looks like. Is it hybrid? Is it full-time? Is it more space because people are spreading out? Is it business as usual? So I think that what the owners are scratching their heads over is not whether or not they're going back to work. It's what that looks like. Do we need more space, the same amount of space, less space? So what we're finding right now is as long as we're offering a flexible opportunity where you can grow, you can contract, you can do short-term, people are coming back and coming back quickly. And the other thing we've had the luxury of doing, which I think is unusual, is we've expanded our outdoor spaces into workspaces. So I think we have the largest outdoor heated space in all of New York City for sure. So we've offered things that we think, and this is so important to say, not things that are pandemic fixes, but things that are long-term, we believe, fixes. The pandemic inspired a certain way of thinking, but this was never about spending a lot of money or a sea change in thought for a period of time. It was, how does this make us view real estate differently?
And we'll get to that a bit later on in terms of really what landlords are doing across the board to shift the focus as to really what the workplace is going to look like. And talking about the outdoor space, and we talked a little bit more about the hospitality feel of what these buildings are trying to bring to the tenants, I think is certainly what I'm seeing across the board. Megan, across your portfolio, I mean, obviously Tishman being such a large landlord with different types of asset types, where are you seeing demand from your tenants? In what areas and what sectors?
I think, it's interesting. I think this provides really good context because maybe RAMNEEK sees a little bit more Midtown too, but KATHE, you're seeing like a whole different, all different parts of the market. But for us in Midtown, 18 months ago, it was just frozen. I think the here comes the sun analogy that Lori used is so apt because it did start to thaw. And we've seen a lot of, as RAMNEEK mentioned, financial services. I'd say sort of smaller, mid-sized financial services where you might have one well-established principal, but they're starting new business. It's not a startup, but it's a new business, and they really value the face-to-face. There's a competitive advantage, I think, to being face-to-face. So in our buildings that cater to that kind of customer, I'm thinking of 520 Madison, we actually saw bidding wars. We actually saw activity that exceeded pre-pandemic. But the type of customer that we saw it with they were all very similar to each other. And so that was interesting. I think
And how much space, like how much space are we talking about? Like what are the ranges that the demand was for?
That would have been, 5,000 square feet to 20,000 square
Okay.
feet, not 100,000 square feet. I think we're just starting to see the 100,000 square feet and larger tenants re-engage. I think for those tenants, it's a much different decision process.
I agree.
So they're very thoughtful about the back to work. How do we plan? It's very hard to plan what you need. So I think they've taken the time, but they are starting to tour. We've signed some leases. We're seeing more and more of them in our new developments on the west side. So, it's been just good progress and sort of mind-blowing how far we've come when you think what you really felt like in April, where you really had no idea that we would come this far so fast.
What are the type of retailers who are in the market today? KATHE, what are you seeing?
I think we're seeing two things. One is, interestingly, experiential, which again, 6 months ago, we would have said nobody wants an experience, no one wants to go into spaces, but everybody sees the light at the end of the tunnel and is jumping in now, because if you think about how long it takes to sign a lease and build out a space, it really is, a year, 18 months, and I think everybody is predicting that we're in a completely different space in 18 months and craving experiences again, right? There's been a lack of that. So we see a lot of experiential retailers coming to us, and food. As long as they can have, and again, I think this is the future of food, even in New York City where there's cold weather, as long as they can have outdoor space and takeout windows, we're seeing a lot of food come back to us again.
And what different approach are you taking when you're negotiating these leases with your prospective retail tenants compared to office tenants? Is there a difference in approach? And are you seeing office tenants, for example, looking for more shorter terms, less of a commitment compared to some of the retail tenants?
Yes, I would say that is probably the distinguishing factor and the only one. I would say that office tenants are still they want to be somewhere and they want their employees back at work. They really do, but they're not sure what that looks like in a year from now. I would say the retailers care about having a flag in the ground. Everybody knows they're there, and they know they're there long term.
So Megan, as a landlord, you have an office tenant, prospective office tenant coming to you saying, we want to take 25,000 square feet, but we don't want to commit to more than 2 years. Those are the things that I'm seeing. How are you dealing with those challenges and those types of situations, which understandably from a tenant's perspective, they're weary, right? Hopefully coming out of the pandemic, weary of committing to long term. How is Tishman dealing with something like that?
Well, we, pre-pandemic, we had started a flex space platform. We call it Studio, and it has different kind of levels. There's, at the most basic, co-working, desk sharing, and that's, I think that's capturing a whole new customer that, frankly, we never even saw before in our office world. But then we also can service, you could call them enterprise clients, but these larger, recognizable names that are just in the position that you're describing, looking to kind of bide their time to make a decision. And we have seen that. We opened a studio at 300 Park, so it's on 50th and Park, a great location, maybe a building that you've walked by and not seen so much. It's the Colgate Palmolive building, and that opened in the pandemic. It is now 90% occupied, wow. And it's a range, some well-recognized names that just took touchdown space there while they figure out what's our footprint, and as well as just smaller entrepreneurs.
RAMNEEK, in terms of the tenants that you're representing, whether financial institutions, law firms, what are you seeing those tenants really need and want from their landlords as they're negotiating their deals?
I think flexibility right now is key. They know that they want to be back in the office, but it's exactly right. They don't know what it looks like. And so we are working a lot with our workplace strategy group to figure that out. And it's going to look different for not just amongst industries, but I think amongst each firm. Your culture is going to determine what that really means for you. One of the things that we are noticing is a rise in activity-based work, right? And I think this is also what is appealing about these landlord amenities and this activation of outdoor spaces and the whole hospitality feel. It's giving people, depending on what their actual job function is, the area to perform that, you know, in the most viable way possible. Like, not everyone needs an office, or not everyone needs a static desk if the majority of your work is collaborating with others, right? Where it can be done better at, like in a cafe type setting or whatever that is for you. Again, whether it is a financial firm or a professional services firm or a tech firm, no one is exactly sure what they need, which is why that flexibility, every lease proposal that I'm drafting right now, especially larger firms, you always have some sort of flexibility before you sign the lease in terms of, you know, expansion and contraction. It has never been more relevant than like I see it now. Like, we don't know yet. So while I'm drafting these proposals and submitting them, we're still working with the architects. We're still working with Workplace to figure out what the actual requirement is going to be. And we're also, by the way, a few years ago, getting a termination option in New York City was a big deal. It's in a lot of proposals right now, because you just don't know what that future is going to hold.
So along those lines, and I too am seeing whether it's flexibility on early terminations, flexibility on expansion rights, renewal rights, and depending on where the landlords are in terms of their leasing within their buildings, you have some who are more accommodating than others, right?
Yep.
So what are you seeing? Are you seeing landlords accommodating those requests as a whole? Clearly, of course, there are going to be exceptions across the board, but just to give people a feel for kind of what the market is today, would you say that it is more common than not where landlords are accommodating those requests?
I think it depends. You're absolutely right. It depends on the landlord, how confident and bullish they're feeling. It depends on, you know, their relationship with their lenders, their partners. So on one hand, you can say, you know, that this is who the landlord is, but the reality is everyone has partnerships for different assets, and it makes, you know, so it's more nuanced whether they can do it. So even if a particular landlord gave you a termination in a specific building, they may not be able to do it in another. Mm-hmm. And then from the tenant's perspective, the other factor is, yes, who's the tenant, size, and not to say, by the way, that the larger you are, you automatically get what you want. That also means you're contemplating leaving a 500,000 square foot hole in a landlord's building, so it's not necessarily a great thing. But also just the creditworthiness, right? And what the tenant's real underlying desire is. Like, I have one where it's the cost of doing business. They need it. It's a mandate globally in all their leases. And it's up to us to try to convey that to the landlords we're negotiating with. Like, this is a real requirement. This isn't just another, you know, ask or a grab.
So I think we're creating the market as we speak, right? And I think that's really what we're living through. KATHE, I want to hear more from you, right? As you're negotiating these leases, you being the landlord, how are you reacting to these types of requests? And then, you know, to the extent that you cannot accommodate a request for a termination, what are you coming up with as an alternative? How are you getting creative?
So I think there are a few things related to that. One, and I don't know if you're finding this, but it's much easier with pre-builds because you're not investing money. So if you have a pre-built space, and there are lots of them now because tenants are leaving, it's easier to justify putting in a tenant, spending very little money, and banking on the fact that they want to stay. I mean, you have to, practically speaking, any tenant that's moving into a space and moving all their people and putting in their furniture and getting everybody settled is not really planning on leaving. They just need to know that they have optionality. So they're banking on staying, you're banking on having them stay, and to the extent you can mitigate any of the cost if they decide to leave, you're probably, for the most part, depending on your investors and your partners, you're probably going to lean toward doing what you can and structuring a deal to bring that tenant in. So we do have pre-built spaces. I know everybody does right now. So we have much more often than not, with the right tenants, agreed to termination agreements. And the other piece of that is structuring it so that maybe there is some sort of penalty when they leave. And it could be as simple as unamortized costs, which for the tenant, again, it's optionality for them, and the fee is worth it to know that they can get out or they can reduce the size. So I would say for us, really and truly, probably 80 or 90% of the time we're accommodating terminations, and we're just trying to be as smart as we can about securitizing them, putting them into spaces where we don't invest a lot of money, and touch and feel who is the tenant and understanding what they do and what their business plan looks like. Are we feeling very good that ultimately they'll stay? And I think that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's exactly what I'm seeing, both, whether representing tenants or owners. Like, allow for an opportunity for the tenant to come into your space, and then as a landlord, what do I do to ensure that the tenant stays? And I think those are the types of deals that are getting done today, at least from what I'm seeing. I also want to talk a little bit about real estate as a service beyond just the actual physical floor plan. Megan, how do you view that? What is it that Tishman and you are doing to create that type of service-driven type of amenity, right, that you're providing to your tenants, and how are you distinguishing yourself from other types of landlords with other types of similar buildings within the city?
Right. Yeah, we have a couple of different layers to that. So what RAMNEEK was describing about, what certain large tenants are looking for right now, we just signed a lease at 200 Park, over 100,000 square feet. That tenant, when they did maybe 12 tours, and they toured 30 buildings. When they came in to tour, they were very thoughtful, and they said right at the beginning, they'd be perfect for Industry City if they wanted to be, they didn't want to be right near Grand Central, but they said, we are looking at buildings, we're looking beyond our workplace. We are looking at this building as our workplace. So can you walk us through all the different places we can work in your building, and how, and what are you planning?
Mm-hmm.
So we've committed in that lease, and it's something we've seen a lot of tenants ask for throughout our portfolio, but we've committed to building out a full conference center. We've committed to doing a tenant lounge. We were already doing it, which is off of our new visitor reception. We gave them pre-commencement expansion options so they can go up to 250,000 square feet, because they had no idea, so that just rang a bell. And then, so that's one thing, is like sort of committing to building physical amenities and also staffing them and operating them. But we also have an app that maybe some people have heard of called Zoe. Zoe is the Greek word for life, I guess, which is where it comes from. And that enables our tenants to get services right on the app. But one interesting thing we've found is, the app alone doesn't really get much traction at all. You kind of need the app and the space and the programming, which is something we have in spades at Rock Center. So when you have all of those together, then you see this incredible sort of real estate as a service model.
What about sustainability? You know, the green offices. RAMNEEK, are you seeing that being an important component for your tenants who are looking at spaces across the board?
Yeah, I mean, again, especially larger, more sophisticated tenants, it's been, you know, on their minds for a while. But now, just getting your employees back in the office, you want to be able to tell them this is why you're going to be happy and feel safe going into this particular building. Especially if whether you're actually staying in place or relocating. Because if you're in a building that isn't taking sustainability and air quality seriously, your tenants are going to tell you, like your employees are going to tell you, like, why are we staying here? Right? I heard that there's this building going up or that building. And it's interesting, you know, again, when you talk about overall leasing activity is down, but we are seeing more activity in like the trophy assets, which I think right now we were talking about this stat, like these trophy assets or what we categorize as like the higher end assets in Manhattan, they comprise 24% of the availability right now. And yet, year to date, 42% of the leasing that has taken place has been in those 24% of the buildings. And so that's what tenants want. They want the newer buildings, the more sustainable buildings for their employees. That's the way they're going to, you know, get them to come back into the office and feel good about it.
So let's talk about that. How do we get people back into the office, right? It's a challenge that I, as a partner at my firm, you know, we deal with day in and day out. Other professional services companies, other types of headquarters, users deal with day in and day out. From a landlord's perspective, KATHE, Megan, what are you guys doing in your buildings to help encourage your tenants to get their employees back into the office?
I think what we've tried to do is tackle everything we saw as something that employees were resistant to doing. So just as one example, certainly in the beginning of the pandemic, less so now, but it's still happening. I think that people are wary of getting on mass transit. They're still worried about, you know, being masked and the air quality and everything else we've talked about. So we added parking. We actually did away with our valet parking because we realized that employees didn't want anybody else in their cars. So we added more bike rooms and bike stations. So we added things to make it easier for people to get to work. We have there are still people who take the subway, and we have a shuttle that goes from the subway around our buildings. And we actually reduced the number of people that could be on our shuttle. We opened windows, our driver's mask. So we looked at every piece of going back to work, and we started with getting there. So those are the things we did to help people get to work. And then we thought a lot about the experience once you're there. And that's where we really, I would say for the first 6 months, and a lot of the Industry City team is here today, but I want to say we worked around the clock to make sure that we put new protocols in place around the obvious things, how many people could be in an elevator, and, you know, the things I think wayfinding around mask wearing, but we added security to make sure that everything was enforced. We added takeout windows everywhere so you didn't have to walk into a restaurant. We heated 5 acres of space so that people could be outside. So I think coming back to work, and I will say I have found really across the board that people do want to be at work, whether it's full-time or part-time. And it's not just the owners. I think that young people are craving the socialization, being mentored. There's a lot that gets lost when you're not in the office, but people want to be excited about being there. So we've had, you know, on our campus, a lot more programming around cocktail hours and things that people could do that made it exciting and safe at the same time, a real balancing act to be back in the office.
Megan, how about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we did all of those things, the immediate steps to make people feel safe coming back, but it's, you know, still in our buildings, the buildings that cater to large tenants, those tenants are still not back. I think those occupancies are still at 20%. It's a lot better than it was in January, but it's still maybe 20. And those customers are asking that question: how do we bring people back? And what we're thinking about is we have to give people what they can't get at home and lean into all of those things. So if you look at what's going on at Rockefeller Center just during the pandemic, and will be done, but we've renovated outdoor space. We have a new half-acre park on the roof of Radio City Music Hall. Like, that's something you cannot do at home. And the woman who runs Rockefeller Center, who's a dynamo, E.B. Kelly, has said, we don't compete anymore with other buildings. We're competing with your living room.
Yeah.
So, we have to work on these things. So I think it's actually a super exciting time, and has given, all of our partners also the motivation to experiment.
Yeah.
And, seeing what you guys have done, and it's very inspiring. So thank you.
The other thing I'll say, just to add, that I think everyone can do, because I always say we do have the luxury of this campus. So it's not, the genius, it's really the amazing hand we were dealt in large part. But the one thing we have done is we are letting tenants dip a toe in the water. Mm-hmm. And so we're offering tenants work out of our conference center, bring a small group here. So we want people to experience Industry City, remember what it's like coming back to the office, because people are getting comfortable at home and they forget how it feels to grab a drink or watch an older person, do something and remember that those are things you just didn't know. Right. So I do think it's important for all of us to think about urging people to come back for a day, a week, a month with a small division or a small group.
I think phasing in, right?
Yeah.
Phasing in a smart way, in a way that allows the people who are coming back to come back comfortably, while at the same time getting more comfortable with being back in the office than not. And like everything else, it's a transition. But I think with all of those factors being there, having the right space, having the right amenities within your space, and to everyone's point here, making it feel like you are experiencing something that you can't experience at home is what I think we all need to strive for, to allow for that to happen and continue to happen more organically. So want to take the last couple of minutes that we have here to talk about, you have these 3 senior executive commercial real estate professionals who happen to be women. And obviously we are here at a women's conference, so I wanted to touch upon that as well. I'd love to hear from each of you, both in terms of kind of where you see the industry going forward for women. And if you're a young woman starting out in the industry today, any bit of advice that you could give out to the audience here. Kathy, I'll start with you.
Okay. I'll start by saying I think it's a really exciting time in real estate right now. I do think there is a sea change in the way everybody's thinking, and to be a pioneer in what I think in 10 years everybody will look back at as a new way of viewing real estate is very, very exciting. So with all of the fear over less people are hiring and tenants are not looking as often, so there's not as much brokerage or development or whatever it is, I just don't think that's true. I think that right now we're taking a left turn, and I think everything ramps up again. So I think it's a really smart time to get in at the bottom and really help shape what the future of real estate looks like. So I do want to say that there are 2 points of view, and mine is truly, when you get in at the bottom, you're the first one in. So I think that's exciting. In terms of women in real estate, I would also say that across the industry, and I'd love to hear what you think, I think people are looking to have a more diverse workforce. I think historically it has been a man's business. And I know at Industry City, and certainly with the people I talk to, the brokers who have teams of men are looking to hire women. The analysts have been historically mostly men, and I think there is a push to find women who are passionate and interested in real estate. And I would say it's a really an interesting time and a good time, although I will say somebody today said to me, a young person who is in real estate, a woman said to me this morning that where she thinks it's trickier is because everybody is taking a step back in hiring and just looking at the landscape before they dive in again. There's an opportunity right now to just network because there are positions out there, just not as obvious. So I would say for everybody sitting here, it's important to reach out to people and talk to people and go to events. It may not be a straight line from that meeting to a job, but there are so many different, very interesting, exciting pieces of real estate, and just talk to as many people as possible.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, terrific advice. I'm going to take that.
Ditto.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, one of the things I think that attracted me to real estate personally, and that I still love about it, is that it is real, and it's bricks and mortars, and what we've been through in this city and where we are. The real estate industry is literally invested in the city.
Yeah.
You know, and I believe this is the best city in the world, and we really have a role to play in helping it reemerge. And so I think that's really exciting about real estate, and I think that makes the people attracted to it sort of naturally community oriented or relationship oriented. And then to be a woman in the field, it just magnifies that, because when you meet other women, there's sort of like a natural like desire to connect and help each other, and that's for me been so special. I mentioned that RAMNEEK and I started together, and we have a whole network of women that we started with that we keep in touch with, and it's especially this year has been incredible. So
Amazing. And that's why conferences like this are so important, right?
Yeah, I mean, I echo both Megan and KATHE. I think DEI is something that, unfortunately, the real estate industry has been a little slow on, but it is changing. And I think it's a great time to get into this industry, because I will tell you, people aren't hiring, and yet I hear every week, we need more women in our internship class.
Yeah.
We need more women as associates. We need more women to be nominated for the Observers 30 under 25. We need more women for this and that. Do you know someone? And the other part that's frustrating for me personally is when you read these stats, about 55% of college grads are female. I personally think they're all going to work at L'Oreal, because my husband tells me everyone he dated prior to me on Bumble was working at L'Oreal. So we definitely need more women graduating to go into real estate, because there is a need. And it's a great time to be in there. And the other part I will say is, while you may think brokerage is typically, and it has been, right, man's world, very siloed. The future of brokerage is not. The future of brokerage is extremely collaborative, because no person alone knows everything. Like even when we talked about flex space, I don't think it's, a detriment to my business. I think it's another offering that I can present to cater to my clients, and that's what's going to keep me, employed. So I think it's, and all of real estate and a lot of industries are becoming more collaborative. I think being female in real estate today, it's yours for the taking, quite honestly, not just because you're a female, but like you have to work hard and want it. I think the networking is critical. I will tell you a personal story. I was on a panel and someone reached out. Didn't ask me for anything, but managed to stay in touch with me from the beginning of COVID. and we've managed to build a really good relationship, and it's going to, in order to her benefit. And again, so creating those relationships, meeting people, something that I will take your advice, Kathy, it's something that I'm not necessarily the best at, putting myself out there, but it definitely pays. Think of it as a game. That's what I tell myself. This is all a game. This is all virtual. But get out there, meet people. You don't have to ask for something, but show you're interested. Read up on things. Try to just find out more. And being at the bottom, the best thing is you can ask anything. No one expects you to know anything. So wherever you end up, just ask whatever comes to your mind, because it's the best time to do it.
And what a great opportunity now. I've always thought, as awful and difficult and just terrible this pandemic has been, one thing I think that it has provided, especially for people as they're just starting their careers, is this immense opportunity to get in at the ground level and just learn new things, right? There are lots of every single thing that we did over the last 18 months, how new was it, right? It was unprecedented. How many times have we heard that word? And for someone who's just starting out in their careers, what a great time to get in, because there's a whole new world of opportunity out there. And to echo everyone's comments here, say hello, meet the people that you want to meet, stay in touch, network, go to conferences like this, and be engaged.
Yeah.
Really be engaged. So thank you. Thank you all so much.